What is the state of mental health in America? How did we get to the point where about 30 million Americans are on antidepressants? The recent shooting of a congresswoman and periodic violent flare-ups in schools and universities across America would lead me to believe that we aren't doing especially well with regard to mental health. With us today is Dr. Juneja, a leading psychiatrist whose main focus includes psychopharmacological and psychotherapeutic intervention of individuals, couples, and families. Dr. Juneja, whose upcoming book addresses the essentials of American mental and spiritual health, joins us for the mental health installment of Breaking Through. I'm your host, W.J. O'Reilly. Dr. Raj, may I call you that?
Of course.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You have an impressive array of affiliations: the NYU Psychoanalytic Institute, William Allison White, St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital, and Columbia University. What is your perspective on mental, and I would add spiritual health? How are we doing as a country?
Well, I think as a country we're in the midst of change. I think people want more. People want to be happier. And they've realized that money is not necessarily the answer. Even though that is kind of what we have been conditioned to believe through the age of industrialism. But you know, above 70,000 is kind of around that number. Happiness doesn't seem to increase. People seem to be happier up to that number, as far as the annual salary goes. But after that, it falls off. So clearly, there are a number of different factors involved.
So it is a matter of economics, kind of law of diminishing returns, you might say.
Well, I mean, to a certain extent. Again, to a certain extent. You know, if you're worried about how you're going to put food on the table and pay your electric bill, there's a different level of stress versus if those things are essentially taken care of.
You know, some, and perhaps this dovetails with what you just said, some have called our society one of envy. Would you agree that, you know, in what part might this play in the scheme of mental and spiritual health?
Well, you know, in India, it's interesting. I was born in India, but there's always been a huge movement to become more Westernized. So I remember back, you know, in the 90s when you would go visit India, some of these cafes would have tape recordings of various American radio stations playing. So there's been a big push to move towards the West. The idea being that if you had more money, you would be happier. But again, that's not true. That's not exactly true.
So money is actually the central determinant of being Westernized.
Well, a lot of people think that, especially the ones that don't live in this country. Especially that, you know, they don't live here. They think, to some level, money's easy to get here. And clearly, I think we know that's not accurate.
In your observation, would you say that people in India, for example, in other countries, the more Westernized they become, that there's been kind of a fall off in their ability just to experience their lives with satisfaction?
Well, I think what we've in the United States, at least, it's very difficult for us to relax. You know, think of the European culture and coming home for lunch, or even in India, coming home for lunch and then going back to work. Here, you know, working till 8 p.m. seems absolutely okay. So we've gotten into keeping up with the Joneses. We've gotten into this idea that we gotta somehow make that money, buy that car, buy that house, and that will be the end-all, be-all. But clearly it's not.
You know, there was a time when psychiatrists met with patients, you know, once or more a week and actually talked about things. Today it's more, you know, once a month to have your prescription re-upped. You know, what's been driving this trend, and do you agree that it exists, and where do you think it's leading us?
Well, back in the 1980s, you know, we had a big change in psychiatry. Essentially, a lot of psychopharmacological, a lot of medications started coming out into the market. Before that, it was not uncommon that most psychiatrists would go and be also trained as excellent psychotherapists or psychoanalysts. But what's happened is that the trend has gotten to be more psychopharmacologically oriented for psychiatry. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, that the at least in my mind, what I consider psychiatrist, somebody who is both trained in psychotherapy as well as psychopharmacology and medicine, that does not exist. I mean, I can proudly say many of my colleagues and friends that are, you know, practicing in the field are also therapists. I myself, you know, consider myself excellent at both. But if you go into more rural America, really most of America, a lot of it has become about the prescription pad, and it's unfortunate.
Would you say that a culture that supports sincere and meaningful communication in the family and also in friendships would tend to produce healthier people?
The study that comes to mind out of Columbia, they looked at only looked at two things.
Columbia, the university, not the country?
Yeah, no, yes, Columbia University.
Just to clarify.
In fact, the Addiction Institute up there. They looked at the number of dinners that a family has together a week, and they just grouped 0 to 2 dinners on one side and 3 to 7 dinners on the other, and looked at substance abuse rates. The families actually that met and ate dinner together 3 to 7 times a week significantly lower substance abuse rates. They weren't looking for anything else other than did they sit and have dinner together, right? So there's something about sitting around the dinner table and asking Johnny, hey, how'd school go today? And and all of us, or excuse me, all of the family members communicating. There's something that I think is inherently valuable in that, and seems to be, again, lost in our society.
Look at this, actually the power of such simple tribal,
Yes.
kinds of activities that we have learned to do without.
That's right. That's right.
How about the issue of personal responsibility? I've heard it said that the degree to which a person can say, I'm responsible, could be seen as an indicator of one's mental health. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's no other way. And I frequently tell my clients, that, listen, I can't save you. You have to save you. I can help you. I can guide you. I can be part of the team. But you have to do the work. I frequently say that unless we can own our behaviors, i.e. take full responsibility, you can't change it. If I'm blaming you, how can I possibly change something about myself? One of my mentors always used to say that you can alter your life by changing your thoughts. But we have to change how we think, but we have to first know, what am I thinking, and why am I thinking what am I thinking?
Who was that mentor, by the way?
Eric Butterworth.
Thought so.
Yes. Well, Eric's whole thing was, you can change your life by altering your thoughts. That was his mantra. I would add, altering your thoughts is possible, but it's not easy. It takes a lot of work to take responsibility. It takes a lot of work to realize, wow, you know what? I'm not putting forth 100%, and I'm projecting that into my partner and saying, oh, look what you're not doing, versus taking personal responsibility and look at what I'm not doing.
So even when you're a victim, you can be personally 100% responsible for the situation of your life.
There are some studies that show, even with motor vehicle accidents, for example, that somehow we invite these accidents to occur. Somehow something about our energy. There was a few years back, there was this whole big movement with this book, The Secret, right? That basically your truest intentions can manifest.
You'll draw it to you, good or bad.
Right. I think the issue is you have to know what your truest intentions are. And many of our truest intentions are not conscious. They're unconscious. And that's when it probably, Oprah has this segment she calls it What I Know For Sure, right? And I can tell you, one thing that I know for sure is that there's a part of our mind that we don't have access to. That's the unconscious mind. And nobody really talks about the unconscious as far as mainstream. We don't have a real good ability to put our hands around what that means. But I can go into it more if you'd like.
Really happy to be a part of this festival. I know it's a first annual festival, so I'm very excited about that.
It's been a wonderful opportunity, so many different films, different topics, and I've enjoyed it.
I personally had harbored a desire or an ambition to do a film festival, but had not gone about doing anything for it because I knew it was a lot of work and I didn't have the time. So luckily for us, Dennis decided to do it.
I'm very happy to be accepted here at Dennis's great festival, and when you put a lot of work into something and you get acknowledged, it makes you feel good.
So what did you think when I asked you to be on the show called Breaking Through?
What did I think of it?
Yeah, in terms of actually as a model.
I think we all have the ability to break through. The question is, what are we breaking through, right? I think of the aha moment. In general, I like to think of biology, psychology, social, and spiritual. So, you know, the biopsychosocial spiritual context, really to me, which is the whole person. So,
yeah, well, actually, we were alluding to something earlier about the whole thing about, you know, people, say, setting a goal for themselves, and the question is whether they really believe it or not. In other words, and in the Buddhist model, it's this thing about kind of that many different realms exist in this moment. The question is, which one are you going to commit to? So, and breakthrough, you know, in my sense, breakthrough kind of is in that category as well, that when we can set goals for ourselves and move towards them. The question is actually, are we really committed to them, or are we divided within ourselves? This is sounding more abstract than I thought it was going to be. Anyway.
No, but actually, you know, what I'm associating to now when I think of breakthrough is really finding our purpose, you know, breaking through to our both internal purpose and external purpose. I like to think of purpose in two ways. So internal purpose, I think of self-actualization, self-realization. You know, finding out, you know, who are we? You know, how did I get here? That, you know, that eternal question I think all of us have. And then I think we all have an external purpose, which is more, I think, in alignment with our talents, our gifts, or what they call signature strengths.
You know, actually, the image that I had when you described the first purpose was the ant in the ant farm, or the ant in the ant colony, knowing that ant knowing what his purpose is. Are you talking about actually the kind of like based upon what our skills, like different kinds of worker ants, for example, have different things that they're supposed to perform? Is any part of that, in other words, what our skill set is as beings, as operating beings in the world, and finding a purpose, in other words, doing our daily work, making our contribution? Am I jiving with what you're talking about right now?
Well, the question is, what is that task? What is that particular role that we are supposed to have that is in alignment with, you know, what in Hinduism is called dharma? We were talking about that right before we started. This idea of that we have some divine purpose, something that we are naturally not just predisposed to do, but we are, you know, ultimately supposed to work and find and get to. The question is, what is that particular purpose? And I think it has many phases and many levels. Hopefully we find it. I don't think everybody does.
And I think I would agree with that, the idea of an unfolding, that the purposes are multi-leveled and multifaceted, and kind of one is kind of the end of one is the beginning of the next.
Right. So it's almost like each chapter as it unfolds gives us information if we're looking, though. So am I looking for each lesson that's inherent in the experience? I mean, I frequently, I'm an addiction psychiatrist, right? So I frequently will tell people, listen, you know, I could move to Jamaica and smoke weed for the next 40 years and sit on the beach, but I don't think that would be in alignment with my purpose. So I think, you know, I like to think of it as a purpose-driven highway, right? So we're on this purpose-driven highway at birth, and then as long as we stay on it, I think we can find that ultimate goal. But a lot of times, right, we take detours. Unfortunately, I think some people never get back on that purpose-driven highway. Recently, I had a patient, 26 years old, passed away 2 days after graduating college, right? That could not have been the ultimate, I think, ultimate purpose, as far as if he would have stayed on his purpose-driven highway, so to speak. But I think he got detoured, you know, and had relapsed onto heroin and died. Now, clearly, very sad, very unfortunate, but very real. So the question in my mind is getting people, how do I get people back onto that purpose-driven highway?
You know, some would argue that the way his life unfolded and the way that it ended
Was divine.
Was what it was meant to happen.
Right.
And that for him, it was about being just that short of the finish line, you know, or turning things around in the way that everyone would have agreed was the right way to go. Well, he went the other way. But it's very difficult, and I know that certainly in your work, where people are coming to you who aren't able to find out what their purpose is, because there are intervening factors that are taking them off purpose. Yes?
Or they're looking for their purpose and and somehow have found that they're running into a problem, right? That they're somehow not happy. That
satisfaction.
Something's not working. You know, so you were talking about health. To me, what I consider health is how well do I function? So we talk about cardiac health, right? So how well is the heart functioning, right? So when we talk about mental health, I like to think about how well are we functioning mentally. I frequently use this example that if we're standing at the door checking it for 40 minutes, well, that's one scenario. If I can check it 3 times, yeah, I might have a little 10, 20-second routine, but it doesn't cause a problem, right? If I'm standing there for 40 minutes and now I'm late to work because I was obsessively checking the door to make sure it's locked, clearly now it's in the way, it's getting in the way. So the way I like to think about mental health is how do my belief systems and biology, as well as the other social and spiritual aspects, how do those impact my ability to function in this world?
And I'm actually looking as if I were a camera watching what we're doing and what we're talking about, and wondering, it's how can we communicate about these things in such a way that the viewer can maybe even have their own breakthrough. And I don't know if we can anticipate this. I'm not sure. I don't think we can script it. But I want to be mindful of that. I think it's possible that actually people could observe a conversation that's happening about something, a certain content area, as our conversation is going, with a certain level, hopefully, of sincerity, and
have a light bulb go on.
And have a light bulb go on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, frequently, people will ask me, once in a while, not frequently, but once in a while, somebody will say, "Do you really think this works?" And they're referring to talk therapy. And I'll tell them, if I didn't believe it, I wouldn't be.
You mean the old-fashioned kind? You mean the good old-fashioned go in and talk about your problems?
Talking to your patients.
Actually talking. What a concept.
Talking to your patients. Unfortunately, well, some would argue this point, but I think it's unfortunate that ever since a lot of the medications started coming out in the 80s, early 80s, a lot of physicians, I think specifically psychiatrists, figured out very quickly that they could see more patients per hour if they were doing med management versus if they were spending 45-minute sessions talking to them, doing good psychotherapy. Now that does I don't.
So it was all about the Mercedes payment.
Well,
is it possible?
Unfortunately, I think.
I think that way about actually general physicians who look in your mouth, and basically that represents a Mercedes payment, and maybe that's why medicine has evolved or devolved to that point. Well, yeah, was it greed that actually might have created that?
Well, I remind people, every field has its average, it's like a bell-shaped distribution. You got your 60, 80%, whatever that initial plus and minus 2 standard deviations is. I think it's 84%, but you have the big chunk of most, and that exists in any field. You're going to have your top airline pilots, you're going to have your top physicians, and then you have just a lot of average people, average performing professionals. So there are some excellent psychiatrists that still believe that you got to do both. You have to be able to be a psychotherapist as well as use the tools of medication, both simultaneously when appropriate, to treat the individual. In fact, it's not even just about that anymore. I think really the future of medicine is about preventing disease. I also tell people, listen, when you hear something underneath the hood of your car, you can go in then, or you can get towed in off the highway. Either way, you're going to have to address the problem. Denying it, turning the volume down with drugs or alcohol, essentially not dealing with the problem is only going to make it grow. So we must deal with it. So really the future of medicine is integrative medicine, is the title that's been assigned to it. Integrative, integrating both conventional and non-conventional, alternative, complementary medicine, Chinese medicine, Ayurveda from India, Tai Chi from China, acupuncture, mindfulness training, meditation. I mean, all of these aspects now are very important to being healthy. Being healthy.
A little bit later we'll be talking a little bit more about your book, and that shall go nameless at this point, I guess for reasons of publishers and
that's the agreement
editorial and so forth.
Yes.
But is that kind of the thrust of your book, to kind of look at kind of a multi-thronged approach to mental health and wellness?
You know what it is? It's exactly that, but very much from my take of it.
Did I say thronged? I meant pronged. Sorry.
That's okay. But this idea that it's a handbook to life. All the things I wish I would have known in my early 20s, that I had to discover, even though I think that had a purpose in it. So now that it allows me to be, the teacher of those topics. But it is a handbook to life. It talks about emotional intelligence, self-awareness, relationship management, love, how we end up being attracted to the partners that we choose to be with, work, talking about organizational dynamics, role, boundary, task, addiction, of course, one of my favorite topics to talk about, and wisdom is in there as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I want to jump to parents and children. I can't think of a more fundamental kind of reaction that takes place, and certainly the way we train our children, or the way that we were trained by our parents. But what part would you say that parents play in the state of mental health of children? Do you think that actually the karma or the destiny of the individual has equal influence upon how a person's life will turn out? Or would you say that actually the intervening factor is the parent's influence on the child?
I would say it's both. I think we can't really take the water, out of the fish tank, right? You can ask, it's like a fish looking for the water, and of course it's all around it. Children learn from their caretakers, period. They take in these beliefs, and most of our beliefs are taken in before the age of 10. So really, what does that mean? We're all walking around with childhood beliefs in our head, for the most part. So what we have to do is like, every software has its update. We have to update our software. We have to look for where are the errors in my belief systems. So Dad going to work, and me glued to the front door didn't mean he didn't love me. Or my mother, after moving here from India, her crying didn't mean that I wasn't valuable, right? So these are some of the things that I've had to tease apart and to understand what was really the basis of my belief system. So now my mother didn't know that's how I was interpreting her crying and her difficulty in adjusting, in this country. But as a 5-year-old kid, that's what I interpreted. And clearly that wasn't accurate. So we have to go back and look, right, as to what happened in our story. Now, as far as spiritual goes, I think, keep in mind, even when I'm interacting with you, it's our karma or our spiritualities interacting together. So I think parents and their children, their spirituality is acting together, right? Think about the Buddha, right? Or when they tell, not the Buddha, the Dali Lama. That's what I was saying. Think about the Dali Lama, right? They take this 3 or 4 year old.
Well, if it's true for the Dalai Lama, it's going to be true for the Buddha as well.
That's right.
Otherwise, there's a disconnect there, which the Dalai Lama would have to be responsible for explaining.
Right. Well, I agree. I mean, if it's true for one, it's true for all.
Sorry, go ahead.
Right. But this idea that the Dalai Lama, right, they tell this young child, listen, you have this purpose, right? And then who does he become? Well, he becomes the Dalai Lama, because that is a fundamental belief that this young child takes in. And then and it works to express that. How often are we asked when we're children, what our purpose is, right? How often are we asked those questions from our parents? I think this is how we end up feeling lost. In fact, the addiction problem, especially opiate use, prescription pill abuse, heroin use and abuse and dependence, all these things are huge problems right now. And I think our younger generations are in quite a bit of trouble, actually. Earlier I referred to one of my patients that had recently passed after graduating college. Very painful, but real. So the question in my mind is, how can we get people back on track? How can we get people back on this purpose-driven highway, as I like to call it?
We're going to go out on this question. Politicians and civic leaders would love to convince us that throwing money at the problem is the solution to it, but we know better, of course. Where is the real breakthrough in mental health to be found?
I think the real breakthrough in mental health, I would say it's recognizing that it's not just the medications, it's not just the talk therapy, that it includes spirituality, that it includes social factors, which include education, relationship status, and to look also for the complementary and alternative, Eastern philosophies, Chinese medicine, all these other parts that make a whole, right? That there's not a one road answer in. And this is the problem really with, going to a doctor and getting a prescription in 5 minutes. It's lost that holistic treatment. And that is the wave of the future. Prevention is the key. We must prevent it. Unfortunately, the problem is what? Most people that come into my office are in crisis mode, right? The kid's already on heroin. The kid's already skipping school or he's smoking pot. There's already a major depression, et cetera, et cetera. So prevention is the key.
Actually, I like the way you put all those pieces together, and what I thought of is the expression, the truth believed is a lie, and it's important to be open to multiple and simultaneous truths and try to find a way of really blending them together. That's what I got from your explanation.
Yes.
Did I hear correctly?
You did. In fact, Eric Butterworth, again, going back to him, he frequently says, assume you're wrong. Start out assuming you're wrong, because it leaves that creative space open, contemplating from that higher point of view. Really, that's what therapy is. You're looking at your life from a different perspective. Now, it doesn't have to be a therapist. If you're happier talking to somebody in your church, excellent. If you're happy talking to your friend, excellent. But explore, go on that journey, ask the question, why?
Raj, thank you.
You're welcome.
Most people think they're looking for a purpose in life, but what we are truly looking for is an experience of being alive, of feeling consumed by the rapture of life. That's actually a Campbell quote. We invite your comments and questions to breakingthroughtv@gmail.com. That's THRU. And please be on the lookout for Dr. Raj's book by tuning into his website, and it's DOCTOR, Raj, R-A-J.com. Did I get that correctly?
That's it.
Okay, for Dr. Raj Juneja and for myself, W.J. O'Reilly, be well and see you next time.
Thank you.